LINQ queries are used to retrieve data from a database when you are using C# and Entity Framework. To create a LINQ query, at the top of your code, you need to include using system.link. And then the queries, the syntax of the queries is going to be similar, okay, but the actual LINQ method that you use is going to vary depending on what it is you want the database to do. So you're going to have some kind of a variable, and that variable could be a list. It could be an iQueryable, membership class. It just depends on what you expect the database to retrieve. If it's going to be multiple rows, probably going to be a list, okay? Or it might be a class. If it's one value, then if it's ID or something like that, then it would be an integer. It just depends on what it is you're asking the LINQ to do. So you're going to have a variable where you're going to store the results. And then you will have your context object that you would have created at the top of the controller. And to create the context object, you create it as a private object. And then you create a public object and you set the private one equal to it. And I will show you that code in a second. So you take the context object, dot, and then this is the actual name of the table. So in your DB set, let me see. In your context class, you have a DB set. You have your class name here. This is the name of the table. So that's what it's referring to, the actual name of your table. Okay, so you're going to have the name of your table and then a dot, and then you've got your LINQ method and then parameters. So the LINQ methods that are most often used in controllers would be where, because that's going to limit or filter your results, order by, which sorts, first or default. So that would be like if you're going to do a find on ID, it's going to retrieve the first result. And then find ID would also retrieve the first instance identified by the ID. So here is a little example. And the very top is where I am creating that context object. So I've got fitness context is my context class, and underscore context is my private object. Now this takes you kind of a ways back in your C#. But if you are creating a private property, a convention is to start it with an underscore. Okay, so that goes way back. Then we create a public, basically a public object, a fitness context object, and we set that public one equal to the private one. This is going to keep the details of the class separate from the public interface. So it encapsulates the inner workings of the class, which is part of object-oriented programming. So moving along here, we have an index method. And you can see we have a return statement. And then it's taking our context dot membership. Okay, so this is our context object dot membership, which is our table. Checking to see if it's not equal to null. Okay, and this is that shortened version of an if statement. So instead of doing an if all else, we've got this ternary character, which is a question mark. So it represents an if. So if this condition is true, okay, that basically our table isn't empty, okay, then it's going to take that, whatever is in the membership table, and it's going to send it to a list. Okay. Otherwise, it's going to basically display that there is a problem. Then down here, you can see this would be our details view. And we have ID as an optional parameter. And so we're saying if the ID is null, so there's no ID, or the membership table is null. Okay, well, then there are no details. So we're returning not found. If we get past that, that means that, yeah, there is data. So we are going to set the data into a members variable. So we've got our context, we have the table, and this is part of the command down here, first or default. Okay, and then we are passing it the ID. So m.id is for the ID that is in the table. ID is the one that was passed in as a parameter. So it's looking to see when the parameter is equal to the one in the table. Okay, and when that happens, the value gets stored, or the values, because it's going to be more than one. So if we execute this command and members is null, that means it didn't find anything. Okay, so they tried to use a non-existent ID from our summary. Normally, when you click on details, it will take that row's ID and pass it to the controller, okay, which is not a problem. It should find it. But there are people who try to skirt the system and will go up on the command line, and they will try to get in, and they might key in details / and then a number. Okay, so that would be a case where they wouldn't find it. So as long as everything worked and it found the ID, it's going to pass that data to the view. Okay, so here's kind of a delete process, so you can see how that works. Kind of similar that it's bringing in an ID, and that is optional. And then it's checking to see if the ID is null or if the table is null. And if either one of those is true, it returns not found. This is all one command. So we've got the context object dot membership, which is our table, dot first or default. So it's looking for one row, and it's going to look for the ID in the row equal to the ID that was in the parameter list. Okay, and if it can't find it, it returns not found. Otherwise, it is passing along the member data from the actual table. Okay, and your controllers will have even more commands than this, okay? Because once you put in that database interactivity, every single action method or every single method in the controller is going to have some type of LINQ query. Okay, so if I pull up my sample term project and I go into the member controller, and we just take a look, this is where I've got those examples from. You can see, here's my index action method, and I do have my LINQ query there. Here's my details. And again, another LINQ query. Here's my create. And here is yet another LINQ query. Okay, so you will see them all over the controllers. Multiple classes. So far we've had one class, but if you have more than one, you will probably want to relate the classes or the entities. And in order to do that, there are conventions that MVC looks for. So you need to follow the conventions. And so this is a very, very simple little example. We have two classes. One is called blog, and the other one is called post. So the relationship here is that one blog can make many posts. So it's a one-to-many. That means that I need to take the blog ID, which is the primary key, and I need to put that down here in post. Okay, and this is kind of a two-step process. So I can take the blog ID and literally copy and paste that down here. But then I need to let it know that this is basically a connection to this table. And so what I do is I create another statement where blog is my data type. Okay, and then blog is also the property, and I do a get and a set. These two things combined are required in order to develop that relationship back to blog.